Sunday, May 1923. Our only seagoing traffic cop. Patrolman Corcoran detached for special duty on Newtown Creek. A couple of tugboats coughed themselves into motion. Two broad-bowed scows got slowly underway. A dinky little gasoline launch started up in a splutter. The begrimed skipper of a coal-smudged barge waved a cheery "Mornin', Jack," and traffic on Newtown Creek smoothly unsnarled itself. All because Big Jack Corcoran, a true lad of the harbor, had established himself as New York's only water traffic cop. John T. Corcoran, Patrolman, Harbor A, New York, Police Department, detached for special duty, as the dull routine of police headquarters official orders stated, was inaugurating his performance of the aforesaid special duty. Out in the middle of Newtown Creek, a slow, oily surfaced estuary of the East River, Corcoran rose in his stout little rowboat, known as the Harbor Master, coolly surveyed his own particular traffic problem, and then stuck up a chunky right arm. The broad, bronzed hand gave a signal that would have done credit to Babe McDonald at the height of his glory, regulating traffic at Broadway and 43rd Street. So the marine traffic of Newtown Creek came to feel the firm hand of regulation and responded with a brisk chugging. How does it come that New York has a traffic patrolman on the water? And why Newtown Creek? Surveying his bailiwick, Corcoran explained it in this way. Newtown Creek is not much wider than the average city thoroughfare, but it is an important bit of a stream reaching right into the factory heart of the Williamsburg section of Brooklyn. Everything starting up or down the East River in the way of raw product for industry finds its quickest, easiest, and cheapest route to the factories via the creek. Lining its shores are all manner of industries, with coal, the most vital of all, preponderating. 23 pocketed yards spread their coal dust areas right to the brink of the creek, and adjoining them are to be found lumber yards, cement yards, brick yards, and no end of other freight receiving industries. Till a few weeks ago, every morning found a rough and tumble scramble by barges, schooners, tugs, and a medley of other craft, all pushing each other importantly out of the way. The skipper of each tugboat was anxious to run his charges up to a pier, dock them, and get away for fresh business. At one time, the congestion was so bad that it was possible for one man to walk right across the creek, stepping from boat to boat. They would be lying 6 abreast at a time. Towboats would be tied up for from 3 to 4 hours. Each one would have a crew of 7 men aboard, and the loss was considerable. It is figured that it cost $40 an hour to operate one of the tugs, not taking into consideration the loss of business that resulted from the congestion. A brick scow usually carries from 350,000 to 390,000 bricks, while the coal barges carry from 900 to 1,100 tons. Naturally, the crowding on the creek led to complications that had their effect on the industries of Williamsburg. Out of it all came the inevitable conference of businessmen to see what could be done. They met in the business office of the Chapman Docks. The coal men took the floor and, pointing out the serious shortage of coal in the city, complained that traffic congestion on Newtown Creek was so great that they could not get the coal they needed up to their yards. The brickmen, arguing the need for more construction, said that unless something was done about Newtown Creek, they could offer no relief for the building situation. Their appeal was fortified by the lumber merchants. There was a lot of talk, and in the end, one more problem was put up to the police department. Down at headquarters, they made short work of it. It took them half an hour to decide that it was a job for Harbor A. Somebody pointed out that water traffic was a matter that had been studied by the federal government and that all sorts of regulations had been duly drawn up and promulgated. These regulations specifically stated that on a sheet of water the size of Newtown Creek, vessels should never be more than 2 abreast. Corcoran was assigned to the job and 2 weeks ago took up his novel duties. He established headquarters at the foot of Metropolitan Avenue and the creek. I went on the job on a Saturday morning, and believe me, traffic on Saturdays on this creek is pretty heavy, said Corcoran. They gave me a rowboat, and I rowed out to look the situation over. It was long about 8 o'clock in the morning, and traffic hadn't really started yet. There was a big fleet of barges and such like down around the bend, but they weren't figuring on starting up till along about 9 o'clock. Headquarters had sent to the offices of the towing company notice of the fact that I had been appointed to this job and had also sent a copy of the federal regulations regarding traffic on small rivers, so the tugboat skippers knew what to expect. I rowed up and down the canal and noted the places where barges could dock. Then I rowed down about half a mile where the boats were waiting, and hailing the fleet, I sent several of them upstream to the vacant berths. I told the rest to stay down there till I gave them the word to come ahead. In this way I disposed of the fleet, and for the first morning in a pretty long time, I guess, there wasn't any congestion. I kept the tugs going ahead under one bell. That means slow speed ahead, so's I could keep rowing alongside and see that the orders were obeyed. Have you had to make any arrests for traffic violations, handed out a summons, or anything like that? He was asked. Corcoran is 6 feet in height. In addition, he weighs 210 pounds, all solid muscle. You can tell from his name that he's Irish. He drew himself up magnificently. He pulled his cap off, revealing a curly brown shock of hair, and then he said, "Nah, they don't prove bulky. They never even dispute. They know they've got to live up to the rules. And then, besides, I never ask the captain to do anything unreasonable. You see, I'm a pilot myself. I hold a master pilot's license to pilot a ship of any tonnage in the harbor of New York. For 7 years, I was a pilot with the Barber Steamship Company in South Brooklyn. I knew the ropes and the bells, too. If I tell them to stop, they stop. If I tell them to go, goes the word. And there's never any left-hand turns on this here beat. I certainly like this job, and it's home sweet home for me." Corcoran took a seat on the string piece in the shadow of the Metropolitan Avenue Bridge and talked. Patrick Sheehan, an old pal of his, leaned his arms on the railing of the bridge and seemed disposed to join in. Sheehan has been tender of that particular bridge for a mere period of 33 years. As he proudly remarked a little later, he opened it 18,000 times last year. He then recalled the days when you had to pay a penny to get across the bridge, but Sheehan is another story. Over at 436 Van Brunt Street, Brooklyn, there are 7 young Corcorans who have only to look out their back window to gaze over the Erie Basin. Corcoran himself was born and brought up on the shores of the basin, and he plans to bring up his children there. In fact, when there is no school, John F. Jr. rides around with his father in the rowboat. New York's only water policeman is a member of the Police Honor Legion, wearing on his left cuff the bronze star that signifies official commendation. He has figured in a number of thrilling exploits and has several daring rescue marks to his credit in the 7 years he has been a member of the police force. In spite of his big family and his crowded police career, Corcoran is only 33 years old. On February 28, 1920, he was a member of the crew of the police boat Patrol when that stanch little vessel, responding to a wireless, went out through a blinding snowstorm and high wind and gale to the aid of the Old Dominion steamship Princess Anne, which went ashore at 2:30 a.m. in the snow fog at Rockaway Beach. Corcoran was at one set of oars in the lifeboat that successfully carried the passengers and crew, 64 people in all, from the stranded vessel to the Patrol. It was a wild night, but Corcoran got his Brown Star for that deed. On May 30, 1920, he was acting as pilot of Police Boat 8. They were bound up the North River and were abreast of Spuyten Duyvil, where a big swell, set in motion by a passing river steamer, overturned in midstream one of the many holiday canoes. The occupants of the canoe, 2 girls and 1 young man, were having a hard time of it when Corcoran and a fellow member of the police boat's crew, Alex Sprenson, came alongside and pulled the 3 aboard. They rushed for the Manhattan side, and the physician who revived the 2 girls declared that they had been rescued only just in time. In March 1921, Corcoran and another policeman set out at 3 a.m. one night from the Battery to rescue a fishing party that had embarked for Bayonne in a motorboat. Gasoline had given out, and the motorboat was rapidly being whirled out to sea. Aboard her were a man, his 8-year-old son, and his son-in-law. The latter dived over the side of the motorboat and swam to Swinburne Island, where the authorities had communicated with Harbor A. Out in the darkness, Corcoran and his companions conducted a hazardous search, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, just as daylight was beginning, they found the drifting craft, which was sending up feeble calls for help. Caught in the clutch of the sea, 1 mile south of Romer Shoal Light, Corcoran found the man in bad shape from shock. But the little 8-year-old was comfortably asleep in the bottom of the boat with his father's coat wrapped around him blanket-wise. Corcoran has also chased the rum runners and tells how he and Sergeant John J. Smith, now retired, fought a battle in the darkness off Fort Hamilton that ended in the capture of 3 rum runners and a big haul of contraband. During the strike of pilots in 1909, Corcoran was ordered into service to pilot city-owned vessels in other departments. During the war, he was a member of the special squads that maintained watch for enemy activities along the waterfront. Many nights, he was tumbled out of his berth to rush up the river, only to find that an over-alert pier watchman had mistaken an innocently drifting packing box for a boatload of bomb-bearing enemies. Then for a time I was, the poobah at Barren Island, he remarked. They assigned me to go down there when the influenza was at its height a couple of years ago. I found a nice station house with several cells in it, and as I was the only cop on the island, I became the mayor, the chief of police, and a sort of spare-time nurse. One night, a fellow shot and killed a chap down there. It was the first murder on Barren Island in 14 years. It took place a mile away from my post. A police boat took the injured man away, and I went down in the darkness and located the murderer's house. I knocked on the door with my nightstick. The answer was the bursting open of 2 shutters on a ground floor window. I immediately fired 2 shots. Then I climbed in the window and got the fellow. His name was Jacob Stolz. He was sentenced for manslaughter and got 9 years in Sing Sing.